Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brilliantly Resilient Live. We are so happy that you're joining us today because we have one of my old friends on. And by old friends, I mean like from about 2 weeks ago. But you're gonna understand after we talk with Bobbi for a while here. You feel like you've been friends for so long that you forget that you're the goofball that reached out to her on LinkedIn over something that she wrote, and then you're like, oh yeah, we haven't been friends since high school, but it feels that way. So I'm so happy to introduce you to Bobbi Kahler, and I want to tell you here, you're gonna understand why. This is the name of her podcast. Ready? UnYielded, thriving no matter what. Is that like saying brilliantly resilient?
Brilliantly resilient, baby.
Right? It's like the same thing.
Resilient.
So Bobbi, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
And remind me, you're in Colorado, is that right?
I am in Colorado, right outside the Rocky Mountain National Park, where it is just a glorious day.
Oh, it's gorgeous out there. It's absolutely gorgeous out there. So, okay. UnYielded. Tell me about how that word came into this.
Well, I'm all about persistence, determination, relentlessness, and also hope, because I think that's really important. I think hope is the ingredient that kind of makes us a little bit relentless. And so I reached out to some people, and it was one of the guys at the company that I partner with occasionally. And he said, you know what I think it's talking about is unyielded. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why you're creative and I'm not. So I said, I'm going to use that. And he said, perfect.
UnYielded.
I love the idea of relentless hope. Gosh, is that like a tagline or what? Relentless hope. And I think Kristen calls herself, what do you call yourself? Delirious optimist?
Delirious optimist.
Delirious optimist. So, the whole idea of being unyielding, that word can have a hard edge. Yeah. Like I'm unyielding, I'm not. But when you add hope with it, it's just so uplifting and empowering. So we need to hear the backstory here. We do the whole reset, rise, and reveal your brilliance. So let us hear that.
Okay. So it really started, I would say I always say that 1989 was the year I lived out the country music song. And I love country music, so don't get me wrong, but my life was going nowhere fast, right? I was 20 years old. I had recently gotten a divorce, which was painful. I was the one that asked for it. And even though I knew it was the best thing for us, it still hurt to know that I was hurting someone, So there was that. I was working 2 jobs, and I was barely keeping my head above water. I think it was less than $1,000 a month. And that was before taxes. And then I didn't have a college education yet because in my family, it just wasn't something that we did. And family, you turned 18, you got out, you got a job, and you took care of yourself. You became an adult, which maybe other people did a better job with that. But
I don't know too many people at 18 who are adults. We slapped that number on it, but.
Yeah, we can wish. And so I was my life wasn't going the way that I thought it should be. And I remember it was New Year's Eve, and this was the greatest epiphany ever. It was New Year's Eve. I worked my 2 jobs. I came home to my dark apartment, it's shortly after midnight, and I turned on the TV because I didn't want to be alone, in my apartment. So I had the TV. And I found this it was a Henry Fonda, Lucille Ball movie that I loved. But on this particular night, I just couldn't concentrate on it. So I turned the volume off, and I was sitting there, and I'm like, how in the world did my life end up this way? And I think that I was probably hoping there was someone I could blame, but the answer that came back to me was, your life is a reflection of the choices that you've made so far. And at first, that really ticked me off because I'm like, where's the fun in that, But then I'm like, okay. But when I really thought about that, I thought, how incredibly hopeful is that? Because to me, what that meant is, if my life's a reflection of the choices I've made so far, if I can just learn how to make better choices, I can get a better result. So now it wasn't as easy as it seemed, but that hope kept me going. so that's really, I think, where it kind of, that's where my journey began anyway.
Wow.
Yes.
That's you know what? That's brilliant, because I've heard that expression or that quote about the choices you've made so far before. And I've also heard, it's a choice. It's a choice. I don't know that my brain ever put that whole thing together. And you know what? You're right. That is hope. That is hopeful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you have the
Incredibly
power
hopeful.
and the control to make the choice to go in the right direction. So, we talk a lot about resetting and how do you pull yourself out of the pit, when you're really knocked down. And that's one of those, like, I'm sitting here thinking about like our journal and all of our inspiring stuff, that's one of the things that we can point people directly to, that one double sentence there. You have the control and the power to just make one new choice tomorrow.
That's right.
And get on the right path.
Right. It can really begin with the one new choice. And even, here's the other thing. I'm kind of prone to action. Like I'm okay even if it's the wrong action, because the way I look at it is, if I take an action, it's going to either move me closer or it's going to reveal maybe an error in my thinking. But in either case, it's moving me forward. Right? Even if I learn, even if it's a mistake, I'm learning from it.
So I wrote this book. It's back there. It's called The 15-Minute Master. And actually one of the principles of it is exactly that. You take one single action step, because what ends up happening is the other variables of whatever they are going to contribute to the situation and change it in one way or another. And as you said, you move forward or you learn something, and we have to value that part of it, right?
That's right. That's right. I always think, if I'm learning, it's not a failure if I'm learning, and I think that people remain stuck because they're like, well, what if I fail, or what if it's a mistake? So what? You're still moving forward.
Yeah. Kids don't take failure as failure. They take it as part of the process. It's not until we introduce that idea of failure being a shameful thing that they associate it with being wrong. When you see a little kid, they just, oh, well, it's part of the process. I told Kristen last week, we were at the beach and my granddaughter, we were building one of those little drip castles, where you drip the sand onto they're so fun to do.
So much
It wasn't happening fast enough for her, so she kind of took a thing of sand and dumped it on there. But then she, instead of like having a fit, she looked at it and said, well, that didn't work. And she tried something else.
Right. Versus judging it, right?
But don't you think that as parents, we often would say to the kid, what's the matter with you? Why did you do that? And then our brains start to, that's the wires that form, like, don't make that mistake.
Too often you put yourself out there.
Yeah. So when you started on that journey of, hey, I have to make better choices, like where do you begin with that? Because I think a lot of people have trouble. Okay, I have to take one first step, but where do I start?
Right. So, and maybe this is just what worked for me, but I started looking at, are my actions aligning with what I say I value? Mm-hmm. So for example, for me, it was, I really wanted to go to college because I thought, I was reasonably smart in high school. I think I could do this. And, but then I started looking at it and I thought, because my parents were going to pay for it. And I thought, well, I have to save money for it. But was I actually saving money? No. I started looking at decisions I was making with my money. Now, granted, I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was like spending, and this is so stupid, I was spending $20 a month to go to the tanning bed, right? $20 a month when you're bringing home less than $1,000. That's a lot of money. And I lived in Southwest Missouri. It's sunny there. Go outside. The outdoors is free. But I started looking at it and thinking, are my choices really aligning with what I say I value? And they weren't. And so that's where I'm like, okay, I need to start making changes here. So that's kind of where I started.
And it's a little thing. Mm-hmm. I think, when we're in those stuck places, and this is one of the things that Kristen and I talk about all the time, you feel like a big problem needs a big solution.
That's right.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
No. And okay, so this will give you a little insight into what kind of kid I was. But I was a tomboy, and I loved to be outside, and I was a tree climbing champion, at least in my mind. Okay, and that was a made up title that I gave myself. And but I loved climbing trees, and my friend and I could always climb higher than anybody else. But I noticed something, like I would just get started. I would start climbing. I'd make it to one branch. I'd be like, okay, where do I go next? And then I'd go to that branch, and sometimes it was a mistake, so I'd come back down. But I was always climbing higher. And I had one friend, his name was Harold. He's my best friend. He would stand on the ground, and he'd look up at the tree, and he'd try to figure out where he could go. I'm like, you can't see far enough ahead. So Mary Fran, what you just said there, it's like, do something, right? Take some action forward. You can always reassess, because sometimes it seems like it's such a big problem. And it is, it can be, but we can still take one step, just one step.
I think that's what always paralyzes me to make a decision. Like I try to say now, instead of that I am a procrastinator, that I'm a researcher. I like to research.
Oh, much better.
Yeah, I'm reframing that word, right? My mom used to call me procrastination. I was such a procrastinator, but I wanna have a perfect view of the finish line and all the steps to get to that finish line. And it's what I realize now, almost at 49, is it's paralyzing. There's not enough there. You got to just start taking those actions. And actually, it's been this crazy live show every day while we're in quarantine with no hairdressers anywhere in sight that I've learned to just keep moving forward. Do one thing today. And then, because now after, it's almost 100 days on the air, and we look back and see all the people we've been able to talk to and everything I've learned to come out of crisis and everything. But yeah, I'm a little bit of a slow learner. 48 years since I learned to stop researching so much.
Hey, as long as you get there, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So I'm gonna jump on you.
So how did you started to make one right decision, and you were very young when you kind of came to this sort of realization. So where did that take? Did you go to college? Did you end up in school? And what happened after that to move things? I mean, clearly where you are now, you're a different person than who you were then. Let me qualify that. I don't know that we're different people. We are again the product of our choices, and you're in a different place.
Very different place. So I did go to college, but what I determined is, because I went to that was one of the first things I did, is I went to the local college, and I said, hey, how can I make this happen? And I was trying to get financial aid. But I was young enough where I was still considered a dependent. And because my parents wouldn't pay for it, they're like, well, we can't really help you. So I'm like, okay. So I was in Southwest Missouri. There weren't a lot of great jobs at that time there. Someone actually suggested to me, they're like, the best job in town, it was working at the Tyson poultry factory. And the best job, it gets worse. It gets worse. The best, the most coveted job was debeaking baby turkeys. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what I can do, but it's not going to be that. So I decided I had to move. I had to move out of that area. I moved back to the area.
Decision.
Yeah, that was an easy one. That was one of the easiest ones to make, And so I moved back to where I was from in Illinois, because I knew some people, and I really thought I wanted to become an attorney. So I thought, well, I'm going to get a job at a law firm. And so I got an entry-level job, and within like 18 months, I was making double what I was making before, working the two jobs. So then I could start going to college. So I went to college, and I was so glad I got the job at the law firm, because they were very good to me. And that's where I really developed my love of training. But I knew very quickly, I don't want to be an attorney. So that saved me, the paying for law school. So I did that. And eventually I went on to get my graduate degree. And both my undergrad and my graduate degree, they're kind of based on the science of human flourishing. So what does it take for us to truly flourish and thrive? But something I did along the way too, because I knew that since I didn't have my college education yet, as I was working at the law firm, is I always thought, how do I add more value? How do I step up when there's an opportunity? So that I'd be that go-to person, and then that's how I'd get my promotions, because it wasn't going to be on my resume. It just wasn't. you know?
Yeah.
So I always thought, how can I solve problems for other people? How can I make myself indispensable?
So there's two things that I'm hearing that we talk about a lot. The first of which is don't be married to an outcome,
That's right.
because you know, your idea was I'm going to be a lawyer, and then you got there and you were like, yay, no,
No.
this is not the thing for me. Nope,
Oops.
not doing that. So you start down a path, but you can always adjust, and you always, you know, you take that new information in. And then I just totally forgot what the second thing was that you were going to. Oh, the value part. Yeah. How can I add value?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, I get lost in my own brilliance sometimes. I just don't
That's
even
a
know.
good thing.
So the idea of how can you serve and how can you become that go-to person? So that's something
That's
that
right.
you took through your whole life, I'm assuming.
Yep. Actually, I always watched my dad. My dad was a superintendent on construction jobs, and that was in the 70s and 80s, and he was never out of work. My dad was one of those people where, like, clients would wait for him to be available. That's how good he was. And then I remember that as a kid, my parents decided they weren't going to spend money on school clothes. So I started, my first business was a little BlackBerry business, right? I picked blackberries and I sold them to the neighbors, you know, because I needed to make money for school clothes, right? So one day she was my best customer. Her name was May. And she said, you know, Bobbi, I have to let you know that my grandkids, they've offered to pick blackberries for me, and then she could pay her grandkids. And I'm like, well, how am I going to protect this? You know, how do you protect yourself against grandkids? So I'm like, so I told her, I'm like, would you just give me one more shot, you know? And she's like, sure, go ahead. So I picked her, I think it was a quart, I don't know, maybe a gallon of blackberries. And then I added in one extra cup of blackberries. So I thought, I want to show I'm providing extra value, you know? And but I really thought, it's grandkids, I have no chance at this. So she called me. So I called her a couple days later, because if you're in sales, you know, you got to ask for the sale. And so I called her and I said, hey, May, I'm sure you're going to, you know, go with your grandkids, but I'm just following up. And she's like, oh no, you earned my business. And I almost dropped the phone. I said, seriously? She said, yeah, you gave me extra. They only gave me like a quart, whatever it was that we were supposed to pick. And I thought, you know what? That stuck with me, because if you that can protect you against grandkids, you know, seriously.
If you can beat out the grandkids, you got the win.
You got
That's right.
something there. That is
That's right.
hilarious.
So I've always remembered that. And it's like, how can I deliver more? How can I deliver more?
Wow, that's amazing. So when you do your trainings, is that obviously is part of what you do. So how did you get into the whole training thing? How did that evolve?
That is, I think I have a lot of teachers in my family, right? And I think that teaching has always been near and dear to my heart. Both grandmothers were teachers, but when I had a job at one of the law firms, I went through the computer. Oh God, this is so funny. I went through the computer training, and the gal who did the training, her name was Karen. And I thought, wow, if Karen ever like moves or quits this gig, this is something I could do, even though I'd never done it before in my life. But I thought, why couldn't I do it? So it was like 2 years later, Karen decided to move to, because I was in Chicago, she decided to move to Seattle. So I went to the HR manager, and Cindy, and I said, hey, I think I could do this. And she's like, okay. So she's like, I'll give you a try. And at the time, this was way back in the 90s when everyone was on DOS. And I started to notice that we were falling behind, like we had to make the shift to Windows. So I went to Cindy and I said, you know, Cindy, I really think we have to make the shift over to the Windows platform. And she's like, can you train on that? I'm like, sure I can. I had never used Windows. Like, I had never used a mouse, but I'm like, I can learn, right? I can research, I can learn. So I went home, I bought myself the new program, and I taught myself. And then I taught a 300-person law firm how to do it. And that really, that's where my love of training, and at a point, that's why I left the law firm, because I loved the training so much that I knew this is what I have to do. You know, and it was, and they became my first client, and they wished me well. I mean, it was great. And that's how I, you know, that's how I ended up training, because I just love it.
That's so
amazing.
funny. Beating out grandkids and saying you can do a program when you never saw it before.
Never
My
done it
kind of
before.
person.
Sure.
We do that. Kristen and I do that all the time. Oh, can you guys do? Yep, sure, we can do that. And then
Sure.
afterwards we go, oh my God, what do we do? How do we do this? And then, but you know what? You figure it out. Like
You do.
figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, then there are other people who can help you figure it out. And I think that's part of mean, that's a great message to deliver to people. Like you can figure this out. Like there's a line in that book that the book that says, "Trust yourself. You're not an idiot."
Sometimes, Mary Fran, I may act like one, but at least I can learn my way through it.
Right.
Mary Fran has the most eloquent quotes.
See, I love it.
Don't go for soft and fuzzy. If you want soft and fuzzy, I'm not your girl.
Yeah. I want down, right?
Wait, I have to tell you this story because you brought up the grandkids thing. I'll make it super short. Since I have 2 blind kids, right? One of my things was I was so nervous about how the kids were going to treat them. And I didn't know anything about raising blind kids, right? But I was just so nervous about how kids were going to be. So I decided that one of the best things you can do is be the #1 PTO mom, and everyone will want to be in your class and love your kids, right? So I set out to win every competition that any class ever had. And the one year it was so unbelievably crazy. I did sneak attacks. I got all the kids involved, right? So I got a message from a teacher that said, or the PTO president, she said, the first graders thought that they were going to win, and I had a sneak attack. We were in 4th grade and we were going to win, right? So she goes, "You're making first graders cry." And I'm like, well, they need to learn early that life is disappointing. And we won.
Oh.
And everybody wanted to be in my class.
And did you hold the trophy at the first graders and go, "Na, na, 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 na"?
I had t-shirts made.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, because the PTO president had said, the problem was she had said to the 4th grade teacher, he was usually in the lead and he wasn't anywhere. I didn't know this contest was important to him, right? I'm only invested if you want me to be. So he goes, well, she said to him, "Attaboy," because he was in like 10th place and he was furious. And I go, oh, so we got shirts made that said "Attaboy"
No.
Oh
with the winning thing. Yep.
Oh my God. Okay, so let's rein this back in here. So
Bobbi did it. She talked about grandkids and beating them with blackberries.
yeah, that's true. It actually was quite in line with the conversation, but let's pivot then. Let's pivot.
All right.
We'll pivot. So when you do your trainings, and first of all, what's your space? Like, what is your space with training? And can you give us a few of your top, like, or do you have a couple of top go-tos, like when you're training that, like, this is important, this is what you got to get out of this?
Okay, so the training I've been doing most recently for the last 12 years, it's actually in the sales and manager development area. So I work with sales teams, and then I also work with, my favorite work is I get to work with sales teams, them become coaches for their team. So the podcast is kind of in a different area. The podcast is something that way back in the day, I used to do a lot of speaking on it. And, I got kind of busy with the other stuff. And so this is coming back to something that's been really important to me, and it's been kind of missing, in my life, I'd say. Even though I love the work I do, there's something really rewarding when you can help a sales manager, because sales managers, they're promoted. Why? Because they're great at sales. Mm-hmm. And then they're told, you got to go coach your team. And they're like, I have no idea, right? And so to help them be able to coach their team, I love that. And this is the podcast is just something that I feel like I'm called to do. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's a little different. So Mary Fran, you say, are there some go-tos? Like, you mean like as far as what I'm currently doing?
Well, like, for example, you just said that a lot of times the people that you're working with don't maybe know how to make that transfer. Like, how do you teach somebody else what you appear to be intrinsically good at? Like, how do you tell them to bring that stuff out in other people? Because that's one of the things we like to try to do. Like, we want to show people how to be brilliantly resilient, but how do you tell people how to find their brilliance? Right.
So what I'm hearing there is, how do we share our expertise? How do we transfer our expertise, right?
Right. For a sales leader, right.
Right. So one of the key problems, one of the key barriers to transferring our expertise is that, I don't know who said this, but they say the expert sees more. So at a point, there's all this stuff that we don't even see anymore. So we have to break that down. So think about this. Do you guys ever do home improvement projects like painting? a room
Oh dear
or something.
God, she just painted half of her house last week.
So then you'll know what I mean. But if you say to someone who's painted a room before, hey, we're going to paint the room, they know that means we're going to take everything down, we're going to remove nails, we're going to spackle, we're going to do all this kind of stuff first. If you say to someone who's never painted a room before, go paint a room, they're going to go get some paint and they're going to put it on the wall. And then they're going to step back and say, something's not right.
Yeah.
So it's that same thing. How do we break down our expertise in these tiny, tiny steps so that other people can see what we're actually talking about? Because too many times we just say, go paint the room or ask better questions when you're in a sales meeting.
Right.
What does that really mean? And so it's really getting down to that level of what does it really mean? And then that's how we can help kind of transfer those skills.
I love that analogy of painting the room, because you do have to, I got to tell you, I'm amazing at spackling. I became amazing in quarantine at spackling. Thank you very much. But you do have to consider all those little pieces to make sure that they're going to be successful at the end. That's a great analogy, because I can visualize that. And some people have to tape. I do not anymore. But
I don't either. It is a waste of time.
Yes.
I can cut a line with both hands.
Stop it. Really?
Wow, that's
Because
impressive.
I'm not that tall, right? I'm only 5'5". So I don't want to move the ladder too many times if I'm cutting the line at the ceiling. So I train myself how to use both hands so I can paint more without having to move the ladder. So I don't know if that's lazy or ingenious. I'm not sure.
It's genius. It's genius, because moving the ladder is a
Brilliantly
pain.
resilient, that's what that is.
That's my goal. What else can I paint? Mary Fran, I'm coming to your house as soon as quarantine.
Oh, no. Well, actually, I do want to paint this room, so you can do that. So one of the things that strikes me about this is when we're really good at stuff, it comes naturally to us. And Kristen and I talk about that a lot, and we don't always value it. So we don't necessarily see how other people might want to get that from us. So is that
right.
something that you encounter?
Oh my goodness. That you just hit on, that's gold right there. So I do a lot of coaching. I've coached over 3,000 people. And what you're talking about right there is one of my biggest pains, because there are people, they're so good at what they're doing. And so, part of it is I want to help people build on their strengths, right? Because I think that's how we really improve, and that's how we really, really flourish. And I'll say to someone, so what do you think you really did well? And they're like, well, and they go right to the negatives. And they completely dismiss every single thing that they do that's good. And when I point it out, they're like, but if I'm doing it, isn't everybody doing it? No, they're not. They're not, and there is a book I read, this was years ago, Deep Change by Robert Quinn. And there was a chapter and it's a brilliant book. There's a chapter in there, and the title of the chapter is called Excellence is Deviance from the Norm. And it just blew my mind, because I'm like, and he goes on to say, if excellence were the norm, that would be the norm. It wouldn't, and it just blew my mind. And it really helped me with that, because we're so quick to dismiss what we do well. And then, well, if I'm doing it, everybody can do it.
Well, and I think that's the thing that we try to tell people all the time. People think, again, we still have this puritanical notion in this country that if something's valuable, it has to be hard, like you have to bleed it, And we're constantly saying to people, look, your brilliance is the thing that you're naturally good at. It's your gift, but you have to stop dismissing it because it's not hard for you. That's the beauty of it. Yay, your brilliance isn't hard. Like, embrace that.
Right. And I think people really struggle to do that, though,
Oh gosh,
for whatever reason.
Yeah,
it is bizarre. It is bizarre. I just said something to my daughter the other day about that. I realized after all these years, I'm a good storyteller, but I have a history in my family. My dad is the most phenomenal storyteller you could ever listen to. But when I started, I didn't think that was such a big thing, just because it's just how my family is. We're good storytellers. And now when I see the power of telling a story for people to understand some new concept, it's like, oh my God, why didn't I think of this sooner? That's one of my really good things. I don't know why we do that we think it's not a valuable thing.
So is that something that you really try to get your people to focus on? Like, hey, look at what you do really well. That's your gift.
Yep. That is a huge thing. And actually, I was coaching one manager. She went through a master coaching program with me. Her name was Carla. She's in St. Louis. And at the end of our time together, and she was phenomenal, right? And very hard on herself. And at the end, she said, you know, Bobbi, the greatest thing is you taught me how to give myself a compliment. And I thought, that's cool. Because part of coaching is to raise a person's awareness so that they can see themselves in action. You know, I always think coaching it's holding up an accurate mirror, right? Because I think a lot of the times there are a couple of mirrors we look at. Sometimes it's the mirror where it's like, ooh, I don't like the way I look there, and we're just going to rush right by that. And then but worse than that, I think there's the mirror that is full of distortions. We carry baggage from the past or from other people. So coaching is about holding up that really accurate mirror of both our strengths and if there's anything that we want to work on. But just because we have a weakness doesn't mean necessarily that it's worth working on either. Doesn't matter.
Oh gosh, we talk about that all the time too. It's like, if you suck at it, then don't do it. Well, at least that's how I say it.
There's a t-shirt.
That's how I say
it.
Find somebody else who doesn't suck at it, and you do the stuff that you're good at.
That's right. Someone said it to me this way once: if it's not your giftedness, it's not your job.
There you go. Oh. I love that. I love that. You know? I'm writing that down.
And it's the same thing you're saying, just swizzle a little bit.
Slightly more eloquent. And quotable.
I like my version better. I like
it too. It should be a t-shirt. Kristen can make a t-shirt for us.
If you suck at it, don't do
it.
Some of the slogans mentioned today will be in the Hallmark store. Others will be on a pretzel cart outside the ball stadium. So there you go.
Oh my gosh. So you've touched on so many of the things that are important to us today. You know, it's about taking that action step, that one thing. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be the answer, because it likely won't be. You know, you have to try stuff and see if something's going to work. And if it doesn't, you adjust. You know, you talk about celebrating your gifts. You've hit on so many of the things that are important to us. And it's interesting to note that you hit on them in the professional world, because we talk all the time. You know, we try to strike a balance between how this brilliantly resilient stuff works in your personal life, but it's also really relevant in your business life, and you have to be tuned into it.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think about what's going on in corporations today and with what I see with my clients. It's hard, but I'll tell you, I just finished coaching. It was something like some managers or more in the last few weeks. And there's this huge difference between those who are like, hey, you know what? Whatever the new normal is, we're there. I mean, and they're thinking of new ideas. They're being innovative. And there are some who are like, I'm just waiting for this to pass. And I think that you might have a long wait. You know,
things might pass you, like just pass you by.
Yeah,
that's right.
We're noticing the exact same thing. Actually, that's what prompted us to start this. We've been bringing guests back that were in our first 50 episodes, that the ones that said, this is the new normal with their brick and mortar businesses. We're going to just try this, because I'm getting nervous about the folks that are still sitting and waiting, and they're getting angry and they're getting resentful and they never tried anything. And I'm like, you can still try, you can still take a step forward and do something, because that bitterness, that's what keeps them broken.
Mm-hmm. It gets in the way of moving forward.
Yeah,
it really does.
So where can people find all of your stuff, and how can our people engage with you? Because, and you know what, let's talk a little bit about the podcast before we go to that. I want to talk about the podcast. That's your sweet spot.
Yeah. So we're in production. We've started, recording, and Kristen was gracious enough to be a guest. On Friday, I'm interviewing someone who was in the towers on Manhattan, and he was one of the guys who helped, rescue people. And so the podcast is about, UnYielded, thriving no matter what. And I want to make a distinction that thriving is not about achievement. It's about engagement, right? When we're truly and fully engaged with life, and we're energized by it, and we can feel it, So my goal with the podcast is to provide inspiring stories, from real people, so that, because we all know that doubt appears on our doorstep and it can be overwhelming. So I want people to really be able to hang on to these stories, so that when doubt does appear, we can move forward. And then also provide some real, practical tools, skill sets that people can use to, because I think it's about building the habit of being resilient and thriving. Because I think it's a habit. Because Chris and I talked about this on my podcast. This isn't a choice you make once and then you're done. Like, woohoo, I've crossed some finish line. Years ago, when I was doing keynote, I had a keynote that was called "Crossing the Finish Line is Just the Beginning." Because we cross one, and it's like, okay, now what? What's the next thing? So anyway, that's a little bit about the podcast.
Well, we love that, because that's our sweet spot too. And again, hitting on all of the things that we talk about, that this is something you do over and over again. Kristen and I make it a point to say to everybody, we so don't have it figured out.
We figured out a few things. We're still standing, and guess what? Another blow just hit yesterday. It's like, here we go again.
Yeah. And it's a process.
It's completely a process.
But you're right with that with habits. When you start, and I just know from my own personal stuff, from doing this show and hearing all the different stories, and I think I'm just one of those people that have to have if she can do it, I can do it. I think that's just part of me. So I have to have people to look to, and, oh, she figured that out when that happened to her. Then clearly I could, even like when I met the blind mountain climber, Eric Weihenmayer, that had just come off Everest. I'm like, okay, if he could figure out Everest, clearly I can get this kid through preschool,
I thought you were going to say, if he could climb Everest, you could climb Everest. I'm like, whoa, that's a bit ambitious.
Oh, they wouldn't let me anywhere near Everest. They wouldn't. No. I would laugh, and the whole mountain would come down. My kids. No, they wouldn't let me anywhere near it.
Yeah. But there's so much value in learning from other people's stories. Think about it. Centuries ago, how did people learn? It was around campfires, and it was through sharing. I mean, it's innate as humans.
I think it's really wonderful that you have added that piece to your work, because, we do tend to think of professional lives as being, well, it's about systems, and it's about procedures, and it's about this, and it's about the rules, and it's about all that kind of stuff. But we cannot, and we have to understand this as humans, we cannot separate humanity from our work lives. And all those people, and all those people that you talk to, and that you present their stories and their lives, and that's kind of what we try to do too. They teach us in ways that systems and organized practices can't.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just, Annette, I was reading something today, and it was something that Ben Franklin said, how many, hundreds of years ago. And he said, what hurts instructs. And it's kind of like, when you go through a pain or a challenge or a problem, that's real instruction. That's what we learn from it.
Yeah, it's the challenges do not have to. Kristen says, do you want to come out brilliant or broken? You want to come out brilliant, not broken. Like that's the thing. And that's always a choice, and it's always possible. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to suck, and it doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. It doesn't mean any of that. You have to respect that part of it too. But those are the times when we grow the most. And I think Kristen and I have both found that out, and you found that out at a very young age, and you put it into practice to move forward.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So now tell everybody where they can find you.
We could talk for 7 hours. Like chapters.
The easiest place is through my website, which is just bobbikahler.com. So that's BOBBI, no E, just BOBBIKAHLER. I'm also on LinkedIn, as well as Facebook. So any of those will work, and then all my links are on my website as well.
And the podcast again is called
UnYielded, Thriving No Matter What. And
that can be found on Apple Podcasts, I'm guessing?
Soon it will be, yes, because we're in the pre-launch.
Oh yeah, when
there's more information. We got some advice that we want to at least launch with 10 episodes filmed. So we're halfway there. And, I just started recording like a week ago. So we're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Make sure you let us know or put that up on our Brilliantly Resilient Facebook group, our community, because people will love to hear that. So
Okay.
we'll be happy to
Yeah,
share it.
give me a
Awesome.
little bit of lead time, and what we'll do is release the YouTube episode of this the same week that you launch, that the podcast is released.
Okay.
So then it'll get more legs to it, and we'll put the links on it, and then hopefully that will
Perfect.
out to a lot more people. Well, cool.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here today, and for being my lifelong friend of 2 weeks.
It feels like we go way, way back.
I know, it's such good stuff. I especially love, one of my biggest takeaways, I just have to say, is that you said thriving is not achievement, it's engagement. And I'm actually going to transfer that over to my Thriving Blind community, because I think that they just think over there that it is achievement because my boys have achieved so much, and that's not what it is. It's engagement. It's being engaged.
Yeah.
Doing. I love it. I love it.
Good.
Okay. All right, I really will wrap this up now, Mary Fran. She's like, come on, it's ticking. Bobbi, thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks to all of you that tuned in. Go look up Bobbi Kahler and all of her stuff. We'll put links in all of the notes and in the comments of the Facebook video. And we will see you all again tomorrow.